He came to court in a faded jumpsuit, hands stained from years of mopping floors, voice trembling with truth. The officer smirked, the crowd dismissed him, and the courtroom barely looked his way. But when the judge leaned forward and whispered one word, everything stopped. Because justice was about to get personal. The courtroom buzzed with whispers and paperwork rustles. Monday morning. A misdemeanor docket in Southside Chicago. The kind of day filled with unpaid parking fines, petty theft, and people just trying to survive. In walked Eddie Morgan. Late 50s. Weathered face. Steel-toed boots and a gray work shirt that read, Property Services, 7th Precinct. He looked like the kind of man people walked past every day without a second glance. The kind who fixed broken toilets at night and cleaned vending machine spills before dawn. But today, he was the one on trial. Charge: obstructing an officer. Behind the prosecution table stood Officer Brent Callahan. Arms folded. Aviators still dangling from his uniform pocket. He didn't just see Eddie as a janitor, he saw him as less. And he made sure everyone knew it. He refused to clear the hallway when instructed. Said something about knowing better. When I tried to move him along, he got mouthy. Aggressive. The courtroom chuckled quietly. Callahan smirked. Even the bailiff shifted like he'd heard this story before. But then Eddie stepped forward. Hands shaking. Heart loud in his ears. I wasn't trying to cause no trouble, Your Honor, he said. I was just cleaning the hallway near the evidence room. I heard him yelling at a kid. The boy looked no older than my grandson. I asked the officer if everything was all right. That's it. Next thing I know, I'm on the floor in cuffs. The prosecutor rolled her eyes. The public defender barely looked up. Just another underpaid, overworked cog in the system. Your Honor, she said flatly, the officer's record shows commendations and no history of misconduct. This is clearly a misunderstanding. But there was something strange. The judge, a woman in her early 50s, with calm eyes and the kind of silence that made people listen, hadn't spoken yet. She just watched. Studied. Every word. Every smirk. Every stumble. Callahan chuckled and leaned toward the mic. With all due respect, this is a janitor trying to play hero. I don't know why we're wasting the court's time. Maybe he's seen too many courtroom movies. The gallery laughed. Even Eddie's defender gave a half smile. Eddie just looked down. Quiet. Humiliated. Then the judge leaned forward. Her voice was soft. Controlled. Mr. Morgan, she asked, do you have anything else to say? Eddie's voice cracked. I've worked in that building for 27 years. I've cleaned vomit, blood, broken glass. Never once stepped out of line. I asked a question, not a command. But that man treated me like garbage, like I was invisible. The courtroom stilled. And that's when it happened. The judge looked at Officer Callahan, expression unreadable. Then she said, that man is my father. You could hear a pin drop. Callahan blinked. Laughed once, awkward. Excuse me? The judge didn't flinch. Eddie Morgan is my father. And I won't allow this court, or this department, to humiliate a man who raised 3 daughters, put them through college and worked graveyard shifts without ever asking for thanks. She turned to the public defender. Motion to dismiss? The lawyer stammered. Yes, Your Honor. She turned back to Eddie. Case dismissed. Then, to Officer Callahan. We'll be speaking about your conduct. Privately. Eddie didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just stood a little taller as he walked out of the courtroom. For the first time in decades, people looked at him and saw a man, not just a mop in uniform. Judge Celeste Morgan sat in her chambers after the dismissal, staring at the framed photo on her desk. It wasn't of her law degree, or her first day in court. It was a black and white photo, creased from age, of a younger Eddie Morgan holding a mop in one hand and toddler Celeste in the other. She had on tiny pink shoes and a toothless smile. He hadn't known the picture was being taken. He was mid-laugh. She kept it there as a reminder of where she came from, and how hard her father worked to make sure she never stayed there. Growing up, their apartment was barely 2 rooms in Bronzeville. The ceilings leaked. Winters bit hard. The power flickered during storms. But Eddie made it home. Every morning, he'd wake up before sunrise, fix Celeste's hair, warm the leftover beans from the night before, and walk her halfway to school before catching the train to his shift. "Keep your chin up, see," he'd always say. Smart beats strong. Every time. She never forgot it. In high school, she came home one day crying. A teacher had accused her of cheating on a history test, said she must have had help because her score was too perfect. Eddie didn't yell. He didn't storm into the school. He walked her to the principal's office the next morning, calm as water, and said, "Sir, my daughter reads everything with 2 eyes and a soul. Don't let your doubt cheat her of her future." They never questioned her again. Years later, she graduated top of her law school class. Dean's List. Clerked with a federal judge. Rose through the ranks with quiet precision. But the courtroom had always been a battlefield. She'd been called too soft-spoken, too emotional, not intimidating enough. Some judges refused to look her in the eye. Some attorneys called her Miss instead of Your Honor. She never corrected them. She just made sure their cases didn't survive her rulings. And now, sitting behind her bench, hearing her own father be laughed at by a uniformed officer, that lit something deep inside her. Not rage. Conviction. Because Eddie never asked to be defended. But for once, he needed to be seen. News of the courtroom moment spread quickly. Social media exploded. Clips of the judge saying, "That man is my father," were posted on Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. Some praised her. Others accused her of bias. Unprofessional. A judge shouldn't take things personally. Why mention the relationship at all? But most saw it for what it was. A moment when the invisible man became undeniable. A mop became a legacy. In a radio interview later that week, Celeste was asked if she regretted speaking out. Her response was simple. "People respect the robe, not the man behind the mop. I had to remind them who raised the one wearing the robe." The host paused, then whispered, "That gave me chills." Back at the precinct, Officer Callahan's confidence was cracking. The department had opened a conduct review. HR requested all body cam footage from that week, including interactions with Eddie and the teen boy near the evidence room. Word around the station said brass wasn't happy. Because Eddie had worked that building for nearly 3 decades. And he had friends. Quiet ones. Custodians. Clerks. Old detectives who remembered when Eddie used to bring extra food to the rookie officers with no families nearby. And now those same people were lining up to tell the truth. The courtroom moment may have ended. But the reckoning had just begun. The manila folder was thick. Detective Marisol Vega tapped her fingers on the desk as she stared at the printed name on the cover. Callahan Brent, 10-year review. She wasn't new to the department. She knew how these files usually looked, thin, neat, with sanitized language and perfectly aligned timestamps. But this one? It was stuffed with paper clips, handwritten notes, and sticky tabs that whispered something wasn't right. She opened it, and within 5 pages she found her answer. Complaint #17-449. Excessive force used during school hallway dispute. Resolution. Officer stated he felt threatened. Case closed. Complaint #18-732. Verbal aggression toward janitorial staff. Resolution. Internal mediation. No further action taken. Complaint #19-005. Unwarranted detainment of a minor near public library. Resolution. Minor match description of suspect. Body cam not activated. No footage available. Marisol sat back in her chair, stunned. It wasn't just the number of complaints, it was the pattern. Every few months. Same tone. Same communities. Same type of victim. Always someone who couldn't fight back. Didn't have the resources. Didn't have the voice. But now, someone had both. And she wore a robe and a last name that matched the janitor on page 3. Marisol printed out 10 flagged incidents. Took them straight to the internal review board. "This can't be ignored anymore," she said. The review chair, an aging sergeant with too many gray hairs and not enough courage, sighed. "You know how it works, Vega. He's got friends in the union. They'll say you're digging for political reasons." Marisol didn't blink. Then let them say it. Because if one more headline hits with that man's name on it, it won't just be a PR issue, it'll be a lawsuit. Meanwhile, in the quiet corner of the station basement, Eddie Morgan returned to work. He had declined media interviews, politely refused every podcast and morning show offer. He just wanted to mop the floors in peace. But peace didn't come easily anymore. People looked at him differently now. Some with pride. Some with pity. Some with resentment. One young officer stopped him near the vending machine. "Hey, Mr. Morgan," he said awkwardly, "I didn't know you were, the judge's dad." Eddie smiled faintly. "Still the same man, son. Just finally seen for who I am." The officer nodded, then walked away, quietly, thoughtfully. Upstairs, Judge Celeste Morgan sat in her office reading a typed memo. Subject: Officer Brent Callahan, pending investigation. She didn't smile. Not because she wasn't relieved, but because she knew the road ahead wasn't about one officer. It was about the system that gave him room to grow unchecked. She reached for her phone and dialed Marisol Vega directly. "Detective," she said, "if you dig deeper, you'll find what I couldn't say in court." "What's that?" Marisol asked. "That this isn't the first time Brent Callahan made someone feel small. But I promise, it'll be the last." That afternoon, the union reps made their move. They issued a press statement claiming Officer Callahan was being targeted unfairly due to political connections and media pressure. But the public wasn't buying it. Because the video clip had gone viral. Because the people had seen a janitor speak truth in a courtroom. Because a judge had said, "That's my father," with the kind of power that rewrites headlines. Online forums lit up. Bloggers traced Callahan's connections. Former victims came forward. A young man posted anonymously. "He stopped me at 16. Said I looked itchy. Slammed me on the hood. My mom never filed a complaint. Said it wouldn't matter. Now it did." Now, people were listening. The whispers started before Eddie even clocked in. Two officers paused their conversation when he entered the hallway. Another one, usually polite, pretended not to see him as she passed by the elevator. It wasn't just cold shoulders. It was something colder. It was the kind of tension that doesn't need words. Just looks, long stares, and doors that suddenly didn't stay open as long. Upstairs, Brent Callahan was still showing up to work, pending review. His uniform stayed pressed, his walk stayed cocky, but there was a new tightness around his eyes. A twitch in his jaw. And a new script. He shook hands with old friends in the locker room and muttered things like, "It was all just protocol, man. They're using that old guy to make an example out of me. You really gonna side with a mop over a badge?" Some nodded. Others stayed quiet. But when Callahan left the room, not everyone defended him anymore. The tape had traveled too far. The judge's words had hit too deep. Still, some were loyal to the code. Blue before truth. Silence before shame. And a few of them? They were angry. Because Eddie Morgan had broken the unspoken rule. He'd made one of their own look bad, in court. Even if he didn't ask for it. Even if the judge had spoken first. To them, Eddie was no longer just the night shift janitor. He was a symbol. The threat. A crack in their wall. Later that week, Eddie walked into the break room and found a note taped to the fridge. Big, bold marker letters. "Know your place." No name. No handwriting to trace. Just taped right above the coffee machine, where everyone would see. He took it down quietly. Didn't say a word. Folded it once. Slipped it into his back pocket. Then picked up his mop and went back to work. But someone had seen it. Officer Kim Tran, quiet, sharp-eyed, and new to the department, had walked in seconds after him. She didn't say anything right away. But later that evening, she stopped Eddie in the stairwell. "You okay, Mr. Morgan?" He nodded. "Been called worse." She hesitated. That note wasn't just disrespect. It was a warning. Eddie leaned on his mop handle. "Been getting warnings since I was old enough to carry a bucket. This ain't new." She looked at him for a long second. Still wrong. Then walked away. The next morning, Judge Morgan arrived at the precinct under the guise of a building inspection. Nobody questioned her. Nobody dared. She walked with purpose through the halls, greeted a few stunned officers, and made her way to the basement janitorial office. Eddie was organizing supplies. He didn't turn when she entered. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. "I needed to see for myself," she replied. He finally turned, eyes tired but steady. "I'm fine, Cece. You don't have to come saving me like I'm some scared old man." "You're not old," she said. "You're surrounded." They stood in silence. Then she asked, "What do you want to do?" He looked down at his hands, scarred, calloused, honest. "I want to work. I want to be left alone. But if they won't do that, then I guess we keep fighting." She nodded once, then handed him a document from her bag. A formal complaint form. Already signed. Already backed by legal support. "You won't be filing this alone," she said. Later that day, Callahan confronted Eddie near the supply closet. "You really gonna take this all the way?" he said, voice low. Eddie didn't look at him. Just kept pushing his mop down the hallway. "Didn't start it, son," he replied. "But I sure as hell ain't walking away from it." The walls were closing in. And for the first time in his career, Brent Callahan wasn't shielded by silence. The tape came from the most unexpected place. Not an official source. Not an undercover sting. But from an old janitor's closet, the one where Eddie had stored broken vacuums, outdated cleaning supplies, and one very dusty lost and found box. Inside it, a small voice recorder. Half-dead batteries. Forgotten by everyone but time. Eddie had used it years ago to document routine maintenance. A habit. Something about protecting himself from false accusations after one too many misunderstandings with officers who saw him as disposable. He didn't even remember half of what was on it. But when he played it back, he froze. A voice came through the static, clearer than expected. Mocking. "They act like just because they mop our floors, they deserve our respect." Callahan. The tone was unmistakable. Laughter followed. "I told the rookie, don't waste your time with the janitor squad. They're just uniforms with trash cans." Static. Another clip. "This one? Eddie? Thinks he's everybody's uncle. But the second he steps out of line, I'll remind him whose hallway it really is." Eddie sat in the dark office, staring at the recorder in his palm like it had just grown teeth. He hadn't planned for this. Didn't expect it. But it felt like the mop had turned into a megaphone. He took it to Judge Morgan. Let her hear the whole thing. She didn't flinch. She didn't sigh. She just leaned forward, voice low. "We have him. On record. We move now." By the end of the week, the recording had been transcribed and authenticated. Detective Vega submitted it to the Civilian Oversight Panel. She attached 3 other complaints, all eerily similar. One from a young cafeteria worker. One from a mailroom clerk. One from an elderly security guard who'd retired 2 years ago. Same voice. Same pattern. Same casual cruelty. Only now there was proof. The union scrambled. They claimed it was private locker room talk and taken out of context. But the context was decades of dismissiveness. And the public? They weren't in the mood for spin. Local news picked it up. Officer Callahan caught on tape mocking janitors and staff, judge's father among targets. Blogs ran headlines like, "When blue turns ugly, the voice behind the badge." Radio callers lit up the lines. "My dad was a cleaner for 30 years. This ain't locker room talk, it's hate in uniform." The only thing out of context is how long he got away with it. Eddie returned to work the next morning and found something taped to his locker. Not another threat. A note. Scrawled in pen, shaky handwriting. "Thank you for speaking. You're braver than you know. JT, parking garage night shift." He held the paper like it might vanish. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. Callahan, on the other hand, was unraveling. His desk had been moved to a temporary corner. Colleagues were splitting into factions. Some still backed him. Others distanced themselves, silent and nervous. But worst of all, he'd lost control of the narrative. No more smirking at the defense table. No more, just doing my job. Now he was the story. At the next Civilian Review Board hearing, the tape was played aloud. Eddie sat in the front row. Callahan sat behind his lawyer, expression blank. But when the second clip played, his words about reminding Eddie whose hallway it is, you could feel the shame ripple through the room. A few officers in the audience looked down. Some left early. Because even in a city hardened by stories like this one stung. Because it wasn't about a badge or a broom. It was about dignity, and who gets to keep it. The hearing room wasn't nearly as big as the courtroom, but it felt heavier. Wood-paneled walls. A long table with microphones. 3 review board officials. 2 uniformed officers guarding the door. A small audience of staff and civilians sat in the rear, scribbling notes or clutching phones. It was quiet, not out of respect, but because everyone knew something was about to break. Brent Callahan sat at the center of it. No badge. No uniform. Just a pale blue shirt that didn't fit like authority anymore. Across the aisle, Eddie Morgan sat flanked by a union rep on one side and Detective Vega on the other. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't need to. His silence, his posture, upright, hands folded over worn knuckles, spoke volumes. The lead review officer adjusted his glasses and called the hearing to order. We are here to determine the disciplinary action appropriate for Officer Brent Callahan, related to allegations of verbal misconduct, workplace harassment, and abuse of authority. Officer Callahan, you may respond to the submitted audio recordings. Callahan leaned forward, microphone hissing softly. With respect, those clips were taken out of context. They don't reflect the full scope of the environment or my service record. I've never been accused of racism or misconduct before in a court of law. Vega cleared her throat. That's because this is the first time someone with a badge listened. A few people murmured. The review officer raised his hand. Detective Vega, stay on track. She nodded. Apologies. But Eddie gave her a look, a small one, filled with quiet gratitude. The audio clips were played again. This time, over speakers that didn't soften the words. Everyone heard them. Callahan's voice. The mocking tone. The laughing. The line about reminding Eddie whose hallway it is. Each word landed like a punch in a sacred place. The review board asked questions. About training. About past complaints. About departmental culture. About why so many of Callahan's reports lacked body cam footage. He answered with practiced pauses. Evasive tones. And not once, did he look at Eddie. When it was Eddie's turn, he didn't prepare a speech. He didn't bring a binder of documentation. He just spoke. I don't want anyone fired. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because no one should be mocked for doing an honest job. I clean floors. I take out trash. That doesn't make me beneath anyone. Especially not a man paid to protect this place. He paused. Looked directly at Callahan. You wear the same uniform I mop around. But you forgot what it's supposed to mean. The room went still. No gavel. No outburst. Just that unbearable silence that follows a truth no one can argue. The board went into recess. Outside in the hallway, Callahan finally spoke to Eddie. You know this is just politics, right? You got lucky your daughter wears a robe. Eddie looked at him. No, son. I got lucky she knows who she is. You're the one who got comfortable thinking nobody would ever call you out. Callahan stepped back. He wasn't used to being on the other side of control. 30 minutes later, the review board returned. The lead officer cleared his throat. After reviewing evidence, including the submitted recordings, testimony, and prior conduct concerns, this board recommends the immediate suspension of Officer Callahan without pay, pending further investigation by the Civilian Oversight Committee and City Legal Review. Guess. One clap before it was silenced. The officer added, we also recommend that the department formally recognize the conduct and courage of Mr. Eddie Morgan, whose actions brought this matter to light. Eddie blinked. He hadn't expected that part. He looked down at his calloused hands again. Still steady. Still working. Later, Judge Morgan stood beside her father outside the precinct, facing reporters and microphones. But she didn't speak first. Eddie did. I'm not a symbol, he said. I'm just a man who works hard and loves his family. But if speaking up means someone else doesn't have to be afraid at work, then I'll keep speaking. The precinct smelled like bleach and old coffee, same as it had every morning for the last 29 years. Eddie walked the east wing with his cart, sweeping past glass doors and bulletin boards covered in flyers. A few officers nodded at him. One whispered respect as he passed. Another left a sticky note on the supply closet door. "You changed more than just floors, sir." He didn't reply. Didn't need to. He'd been invisible for so long that acknowledgement now felt like a spotlight he hadn't asked for. But it was there, trailing him with every step. The suspension of Officer Callahan had made the news. Not a headline. Not the top story. But a middle segment report between weather updates and city traffic cams. It mattered. Because Eddie's name was mentioned. Not as a custodian involved in a dispute. Not as unidentified employee. But as Eddie Morgan, the janitor who spoke up and stood tall. That afternoon, Eddie sat alone in the tiny break room tucked between the locker area and the evidence hallway. The same room where, years ago, he used to warm up soup on winter nights while no one else even knew his shift had started. He unfolded a blank sheet of paper, clicked his pen, and stared. Because writing a retirement letter should have been simple. He'd rehearsed it in his head 1,000 times. But now, it felt like letting go of a war he'd just started winning. Celeste called during her break. "You don't have to do it now," she said. "Take your time. There's no rush." Eddie chuckled quietly. "That's the thing, baby girl. I've never rushed anything in my life. But the truth is, this place finally heard me. Might be the only time I get to leave with my head held high instead of low." She paused. "If you leave now, it's on your terms. That's why it scares me." Back at the precinct, Detective Vega found him pushing a mop across the back hallway. "You heard?" he asked. "I did." "You think I'm running?" Vega shook her head. "I think you're choosing. And that's more power than most people in this building ever feel." She handed him an envelope. "What's this?" "City Council acknowledgement. Signed by the mayor. They want you at the recognition dinner next week." Eddie grunted. "Hope they know I don't own a suit." "We'll get you one." Later that night, Eddie sat at his kitchen table, staring at the letter he finally wrote. "To whom it may concern. I, Edward D. Morgan, respectfully submit my retirement notice effective at the end of the month. I am grateful for the opportunity to serve this department for nearly 3 decades. I leave not because I am tired of working, but because I have said what needed to be said, and it was finally heard. Respectfully, Eddie Morgan." He folded it, slid it into an envelope, then leaned back inside. The silence in the house was comforting, not heavy, not tense. Just moved. Celeste visited the next morning. She brought coffee and an old photo album, ones he hadn't seen in years. She flipped to a picture of him from the 90s, standing outside the precinct with 2 trash bags in hand, smiling at a joke no one else remembered. "You were always the heart of that building," she said. Eddie smiled. "Hearts get stepped on. But they still beat." The next day he handed in his retirement letter. Some shook his hand. Others hugged him. One young rookie, barely 22, said, "You're the reason I see the mop differently now." Eddie chuckled. "It ain't the mop, son. It's the hands holding it." The City Hall ballroom gleamed like a polished lie. Crystal chandeliers. White linen-covered tables. Rows of name cards in golden calligraphy. It was the kind of place Eddie Morgan had cleaned once, never dined in. The kind of room where applause was usually reserved for judges, COs, or decorated officers with gold bars on their shoulders. But tonight, his name was on the program. Not as a caterer. Not as facility staff. As an honoree. Celeste adjusted his tie for the 3rd time. It was navy blue. Too stiff. He hated it. "I feel like I'm being sent off to prom." "You look good," she said, smiling. "I look like someone who lost a bet." They laughed. But beneath it, he was nervous. Not because of the crowd. But because he wasn't sure if they were clapping for him. Or clapping to say, "We did right by you." There's a difference. And Eddie could hear it. The mayor took the stage, microphone in hand. She was polished, practiced. "This year, we celebrate not just titles or ranks, but impact. Quiet heroes who remind us that dignity isn't reserved for uniforms, but carried in every mop, every broom, every voice that refuses to shrink. Applause. Then the words that made the room still. Please join me in honoring Mr. Edward D. Morgan for 29 years of service, integrity, and the courage to be seen. Eddie rose. The applause was loud. Maybe. Performative? Some of it. But in that moment, none of it mattered. He walked slowly to the stage, every step echoing a life of work most people never noticed. When he reached the mic, he didn't hold a speech, didn't pull out notes, just cleared his throat, and spoke like he had when no one used to listen. I've cleaned up after people my whole life. Messes that weren't mine. Floors no one saw get dirty. You learn a lot doing that. You learn who throws their trash away, and who expects someone else to pick it up. A soft chuckle rippled. He continued. I didn't ask for this spotlight. I didn't wake up one day wanting headlines. But when you're pushed enough times, you either fall or stand. He looked toward Celeste. My daughter once told me silence is easy, but it doesn't clean anything. You gotta scrub the truth until it shines. The room erupted. Not wild cheering, but a standing ovation, the kind that doesn't need music or stage lights. Just respect. The real kind. Afterward, a young man in a suit approached him, hands trembling. My father was a janitor. Died before I got into law school. I wish he'd seen this. Eddie placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. He did. Outside, reporters waited. One asked, Mr. Morgan, do you feel vindicated? He paused. No, he said. I feel tired, but proud. Another asked, what do you want people to remember about your story? He looked into the camera. Not my story, he said. There's the ones who sweep your floors, take your trash, unlock the doors before the day starts. Remember them. The footage aired that night across the city. Clips of his speech. The ovation. His final line. It lit up timelines. Got clipped into reels. Shared with captions like, this is how you honor quiet giants. Eddie Morgan spoke with more truth than half the officials in this city. Respect the janitor. He sees more than you think. That night, back home, Eddie finally took off the tie. Hung it on a chair. Sat at the kitchen table. Celeste poured him a drink. He took a sip. That suit itched like hell. She laughed. You wore it well. They sat in silence. A kind of peace only truth can buy. 2 days after the ceremony, the world moved on. The news cycle turned its eyes to a city-wide budget dispute. The headlines changed. Hashtags slowed. The applause faded. But Eddie? He still mopped the kitchen floor before breakfast. Still folded his pants the way his mother had taught him. Still checked the locks before bed, out of habit, not fear. He didn't chase the attention. He never had. But what he got next was the one thing he never expected. The envelope came in a stack of mail. No return address. No markings. Just his name, written in careful cursive. Mr. Edward Morgan. Eddie sat at the kitchen table, opened it, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. No signature at the bottom. Only words. Mr. Morgan, you don't know me, but you stopped something before it happened. 3 months ago, I was cleaning out a locker in the basement hallway when Officer Callahan cornered me. He said I was lingering too long. Said I looked suspicious. I laughed nervously, tried to explain. He got louder. Angrier. I was afraid to move. That night I almost quit. But what you said in court, what you did, it gave me the courage to file a report. Mine was the third one they referenced at the hearing. I never knew if you saw it. Thank you. You didn't just speak up. You reminded me I wasn't small. With gratitude, a fellow worker in your shadow. Eddie leaned back, letter trembling in his hands. He closed his eyes. And for the first time since the hearing, he cried. Not out of anger. Not out of shame. But from the quiet, overwhelming weight of being seen, not just by cameras, but by those who had also been silent for too long. That afternoon, he walked into the precinct for one of his final shifts. No fanfare. Just the echo of boots and hallway chatter. He passed the new janitor, a young man with earbuds in and gloves tucked in his waistband. Eddie stopped him. You doing all right? The young man looked up. Yeah, just still figuring out where everything goes. Eddie smiled. It's all muscle memory. Floors tell you what they need. Then he paused, reached into his pocket, and handed the young man a folded-up copy of the letter. Keep this. For days when you think you're invisible. Upstairs, Judge Morgan sat in her chambers, sifting through paperwork when her assistant entered. Judge, someone from the maintenance department dropped this off for you. Said it was from your father. Inside the small envelope was a note in Eddie's handwriting. I always told you smart beats strong. But turns out you were both. She held it for a long moment, then placed it beside the picture of her and Eddie from the ceremony, the one she'd framed that morning. Back at home, Eddie stood on the porch watching the streetlights flicker on. Celeste pulled up and joined him, a paper bag of takeout in her hand. They ate in silence. Then she asked, "Do you miss it?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "No. I miss being needed. But I don't miss being overlooked." She nodded. "You think people changed?" He shrugged. "Some did. Some will." Then he looked out at the street, eyes soft. But that letter, that kid, even one person seeing themselves different because of this? That's worth every floor I ever scrubbed. The courtroom felt different now. Not because the paint was fresh or the lighting was softer, but because of who was sitting behind the bench and what she was about to say. Judge Celeste Morgan adjusted her robe as she scanned the room. It wasn't a major trial, just a simple hearing. But sometimes, it's the smallest courtrooms where the biggest shifts happen. The case involved a city janitor, this time, a young woman falsely accused of stealing a phone from a staff lounge. The arresting officer claimed she looked nervous. No evidence. No witness. No motive. Just assumption. Celeste watched the officer stumble through testimony. She looked at the janitor, shoulders curled, eyes darting, voice barely above a whisper. And for a moment, she saw her father. The way he used to walk into rooms where no one expected him to speak. The way he stood straighter only when no one was watching. She brought down her gavel gently. Case dismissed. Due to lack of evidence and questionable judgment by the arresting officer. The courtroom was silent. But this time, it wasn't stunned. It was grateful. She paused before rising. Then, breaking routine, she removed her glasses and leaned slightly forward. I want to say something, on the record. The room straightened. There are people in this world who walk into rooms and aren't seen. Not really. They clean up after us. Quietly. Daily. And too often, we treat their silence as permission. She looked at the young janitor, then back at the gallery. My father was a custodian. He scrubbed the hallways of the very precinct that once tried to humiliate him. But he taught me that dignity isn't given. It's claimed. Her voice sharpened. And as long as I sit on this bench, I will protect it, whether it's wearing a suit, a uniform, or a pair of work boots. In the back row, Eddie Morgan sat silently, watching. He wasn't there to be seen. But he was. And he knew it. Because his story had become more than his own. After court adjourned, Celeste walked to the back, where Eddie was waiting. You were always meant for this, he said, smiling. No, she replied. I was made by it. He nodded once, proud. Quiet. You did it with a mop, she whispered. I just turned it into a gavel. Later that night, Eddie returned home and found a new letter in his mailbox. No return address. No name. Just 2 words on a note inside. Because of you. He folded it gently and tucked it next to the other. Because sometimes, the loudest legacy is what's left behind in whispers. What would you have done if you were in Eddie's shoes? Do you think the justice system is doing enough to protect workers like him? Have you ever witnessed someone being disrespected because of their job? What did you do, or wish you had done? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel. We tell real, raw, and powerful stories that don't just entertain, they challenge systems and lift voices that matter. Like, share and pass it on, because someone out there needs this reminder. Your story matters, even when no one's watching.